So the way I look at it, communion is this particularly Christian emphasis. It's not that it's unknown or unrecognized in other religious traditions, but so incarnation would be, many religions look at Christian belief in the incarnation and say, well, that's a bridge too far. That's, whether other theists like Muslims and Jews who say that's too close, too tight, too intimate a relationship between humanity and God, it goes beyond the bounds, or whether it's those who don't believe in a God of that sort to begin with, so would object to it. So what difference would that make? An incarnational God-human being in our world, specifically related to the death of Jesus. I think it makes difference on a lot of fronts, and Christian theology has said just that incarnational fact itself makes a big difference in terms of infusing the divine nature into the human world, which through sacraments and through preaching and through moral life we respond to. So it's not only and always about Jesus' death, but Jesus' death is a big part of that story. And I think the crucial aspect of that piece of the puzzle is it responds to a particular dimension of what's wrong with us, what's wrong with us humans. Sin is a multifaceted reality. It affects many things, but there's one that affects our being as humans in community, and that's, I'll call it scapegoating. That is to say that we make our unity, we support our community, we survive as a group by uniting against someone or against something, and very often by expelling something from our group. So that Jesus was placed himself in that position of being the one who's, what's characteristic of the Good Friday moment is abandonment, right? Not just that Jesus is persecuted and executed by Roman authority and by Jewish religious powers, but that really in the end no one publicly in resistance stands up with him and for him. He dies alone, and he dies alone. The Gospels are pretty explicit about what his crucifiers think it's all about. It's better that one person die for the sake of the people. He's a blasphemer, he's seditious, he's going to create, if you follow him, we're going to have bloodshed and conflict and so on, but by executing him, we make peace. I think we're doing that all the time. And if we say, is there a sin that killed Jesus that we're all implicated in? That's it. So the fact that Jesus suffers that kind of death, is successfully scapegoated, right, and returns from the dead, sort of vindicated against all those accusations, so on, but not in the only way that we humans could do it would be respond with violence, with further conflict, with you did it to me, so I'm going to do it to you. You were wrong, so now I'm going to enforce right upon you. Responds with peace, nonviolence, and a different alternative. Let's form community that's not based on scapegoating and exclusion. Let's base community on this peculiar ritual rite of Eucharist where we remember the one who was persecuted and try not to replicate it, and no more victims. I'd say that's the worldly meaning of the incarnational death of Jesus, the effect it has in history. Christians also think it has a reconciling connection spiritually because God has undergone the death that separates us from God. So even there we can't be any longer separated from God. Even there we meet God who is already present in the grave, in the tomb, in the life, in the non-life, right, between here and the next life. So that would be a shorthand way of trying to say how I think it fits in. And it's interesting to me that in interreligious discussion, the death of Jesus it doesn't make sense to people in other religious traditions, or it makes sense in a way that they can fit into their perspective. And Buddhists would say, well, Jesus is is giving up his life. He's not clinging to things that don't have intrinsic value. So that's wisdom. Jesus shows wisdom by not retaliating, not forgiving, for being. But because Jesus knows there's finally nothing to it. But Buddhists can't see Jesus as quite on the same level as Buddhist attainment, because Jesus suffers. Jesus is in anguish. Jesus is in pain. And if Jesus were truly wise, truly enlightened, that wouldn't be the case. He would not be. He would see through what is happening to him in a way that Jesus doesn't see through it. Jesus identifies with it and is trying to overcome it in a different way. So these always becomes very interesting to me, because with the best will in the world, right, that is, people in each tradition want to affirm the other. Buddhists who are trying to be the most generous in their interpretation of Jesus think, well, he still doesn't quite fit. I mean, we can honor and respect him, but not quite to the fullness we would expect a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. So, and then I think Christians can similarly say about Bodhisattvas, there's so much to respect and honor here and so much to learn, but it's not quite the same thing. These are different ways of attaining extraordinary kinds of relation with the divine, extraordinary realizations, but they're not the same realization. So often I think Christians talk about it, and it seems like it only makes a difference in some non-observable, transcendent spiritual realm, where somehow like God took things off your debit sheet and put them on Jesus' debit sheet, and so now, I mean, there's a way of thinking about that forensically and so on. And that may be true. I just think that there's a pretty concrete way in which Jesus' death and resurrection has concrete historical significance, which is more often left out of account. Well, at one level, you could say some meanings of the atonement would be reconciliation, and Jesus' example is an example of how to be reconciled with God and neighbor. And so if you follow that example, you are replicating the atonement that Jesus presents. And I think on that score, many people, like not religious people who are not Christians, people who are religious but not Christian, Jesus often figures as a very significant role for them. I mean, I lived in India for a while, and there are many Hindus for whom Jesus is an extraordinary, some would even call him their personal deity. So what are Christians to make of that? Here's somebody who's following Jesus along the lines of, well, Jesus' teaching and Jesus' example and Jesus' mode of behavior. You certainly can, as a Christian, say that's a mistake, that's a bad idea. It's not confessionally, doctrinally the same as Christian confession, but I would say Jesus' atonement is for everyone is kind of witnessed by that, or Sufis who have a great respect for Jesus and figures significantly to them, or a secular person who simply finds meaning in some of Jesus' teachings and lead to a certain kind of peace and practice in their own lives. So yeah, I think atonement is sort of an ever-flowing stream that you can't see the edges of.